My name is Bill Wakeham and I'm the Honorary International Secretary of the Royal Academy of Engineering. And tonight it's my extremely great pleasure to welcome you here to our international lecture, an annual event. The lecture was actually created following a very generous donation from the ERA Foundation with the express purpose of enabling a UK audience to hear an international perspective from a very eminent person with broad engineering interest. Tonight, most certainly continues that tradition and that intent, because I'm delighted that Anne Lauvergeon, who's Chief Executive of Areva, has accepted our invitation to deliver this year's lecture. It's a particular pleasure to welcome Anne and to have the opportunity to hear from her, because not only is she a leading figure in European industry, but also an undoubted role model for women in engineering and industry. Some of you may not know a little bit about Anne, but it's worthwhile, therefore, saying a few things about her fascinating career, which I have to say has encompassed the worlds of engineering, business, as well as politics. Anne graduated from the École Normale Supérieure and the French National School of Mining Engineering. She spent immediately after graduation several years in the iron and steel, then nuclear and mining industries. In 1990, she was named Advisor for Economic International Affairs, as well as Deputy Chief of Staff to the then President Mitterrand. She also took on the role of Sherpa to the President, with very special responsibility for the preparation of the G7 and G8 summits. In June 1999, she was appointed Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Kojima, the public sector company dealing with all aspects of the nuclear fuel cycle. When Kojima was merged into two other public sector companies to form Areva in 2001, Anne Lauvergeon was appointed Chief Executive of that group. Since then, she's been instrumental in building Areva into the global leader in integrated nuclear services, employing 58,000 people in over 40 countries worldwide. As CEO, Anne's key achievement has been to position Areva as a one-stop shop for nuclear energy, covering every aspect of the fuel cycle, nuclear reactor design and construction, as well as related services. She was responsible for a successful expansion into the US, for high-profile contracts with India and China, and for the design of the third-generation European pressurized water reactor. As well as her activities with Areva, she is a member of the advisory board of the Global Business Coalition on HIV/AIDS, a director of several companies, including Vodafone, Suez, and Total, and she figures regularly in Forbes magazine, their annual lists of the most powerful 10 women in the world. Her views, therefore, on the development of low-carbon energy in the UK must be of interest to business, policymakers, and indeed anyone with a stake in the UK's energy future. It's my great privilege, therefore, to ask Anne Lauvergeon to deliver her lecture tonight, Building Confidence for a Sustainable and Secure Low-Carbon Energy Future in the United Kingdom. Anne, please.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this presentation. Let me first tell you how honored I am and happy I am to be here with you today. Honored to have been invited to speak in front of such a distinguished audience, and happy to share with you my views on the UK energy projects and my grassroots experience as a businesswoman in the energy industry. You said one of the most powerful businesswomen. My son considers that it is a matter of muscle. And of course, it's not that, but he still believes that it is. So it's very good for my reputation in the family. So I love this list only for that. I would like to speak first about industry. And I think that this word is very important because this word has had a trend to be erased from our minds in the last 1 or 2 decades. I mean most European countries. We mumbled it with doubt. Industry means talking about the past, you know, the dream, the ideal situation that was about services. Industry that was a little bit dirty, that was very material, a little bit old-fashioned. And frankly speaking, in the industry, the nuclear industry, that was the worst. And when I joined the nuclear industry 11 years ago, may I say that some people have explained to me that it was a professional suicide. I was convinced that it was not true. I am still convinced, but may I say that it is easier and easier to convince now other people that nuclear is not only the past, it's not only the present, but it's also the future. I think that's very, very important because if we give up to the industry in Europe, globally, I think that we are going to have to get a lot of difficulties. Well, look at the figures now. If we take our European countries, we represent only 15% now of the global industrial production versus 52% for the emerging countries. We know also that some European industries lack high-profile engineers, qualified technicians, while emerging powers, such as, we could say emerged powers, because emerging, they have emerged for some time, such as China and India, pledge their 2-digit growth on solid industrial development. I think that this situation is no longer sustainable for Europe. Europe needs a strong, competitive industry to maintain its position on the global scene. And I think that, in short, industry is not part of the past, but part of the present and of the future. And it's clear that we have to be competitive in our industry. We have to make sure that we are going to be competitive somewhere. Of course, if we look at the situation vis-à-vis China or India, we are not going to be competitive in terms of salaries. We are not going to be competitive in terms of pensions. We are not going to be competitive in terms of environment. If we are not competitive also in terms of energy prices, we are going to get a lot of difficulties. So, in this industry, facing a global competition, we need to try to find competitiveness. Being not competitive in terms of tax pressure, labor cost, or employer social contribution, we need to play, in our view, 2 master cards: energy and innovation. Energy plays an important role in the competitiveness of a lot of industrial sectors. Securing a sustainable and competitive source of energy is therefore crucial to numerous industries. At the top of that, the energy industry fuels investment. Let's just recall that the construction of a power plant means a few billion pounds in public or private investment and financing, and also that the world energy demand is expected to double by 2050. The energy industry fuels innovation. Let me first remind you that the industry accounts for around 70% of the private research and development expenses in Europe. Empirical studies show that a €1 investment in R&D stands for an additional €0.9 of GDP. At Areva, we are spending 9% of our sales in nuclear or renewables-oriented R&D. This means around €1 billion every year because we are convinced that innovation makes a difference. The energy industry fuels also employment. Energy projects create direct and indirect jobs, many of them being high-skilled ones. And in the longer run, it is about recreating a With this ongoing reform, the UK is to become Europe's laboratory and pioneer in preparing a low CO2 energy future. Bravo for this new example of UK's highly priced pragmatism, all the more remarkable that in the last 9 months the UK has had energy ministers from 3 different political parties, yet the energy initiative has continued undiminished. And may I say that for nuclear is a key issue. Consensus, political consensus. You cannot change every 3, 4, 5 years of energy policy. And sometime I would like to see this pragmatism widely shared in continental Europe. The way the British government prepares the field exactly reflects the title of this conference, Building Confidence. It builds the level playing field in a long-term perspective. But we, the people from the industry, the builders of large projects, have also to play our part. In Areva, we do build confidence in 3 ways: through our products, through our experience, and through our partnering approach. Through our products first. We do it firstly by preparing the low carbon solutions the market needs. And there we find our inspiration in the British pragmatism by putting on the table all of them. Today, indeed, we need both nuclear and renewable sources of energy. Far from the old ideology which antagonize them, we consider them as deeply complementary for many reasons. First, no energy was invented specifically to avoid CO2 emissions. But, by chance, a few of them do not discharge CO2, nuclear and most renewables. Renewables being intermittent, with the exception of hydroelectricity, nuclear is the main baseload low source, CO2 source of electricity. Even if we do not know how to store electricity at the appropriate scale, we work within Areva in a specific company so-called Elion about that, but we are far from being at the appropriate scale. We need both sources to build a sustainable energy mix in Europe. And what I say is not only theoretical. Nuclear and renewables are the core of Areva's strategy. Do not think, therefore, that we consider renewables a politically correct card. We have more than 1.6 billion euros in our renewables order backlog. And you know, we are not this kind of company putting one wind scale on the annual report and saying, yes, I am green. We do care. We don't care about this kind of things. We think that renewables are going to be also important in the future with an important growth in renewables. As for nuclear energy, it also creates confidence by providing long-term visibility in terms of security of supply and competitiveness. Nuclear plants provide electricity at a stable price for the next 60 years. 60 years, it's a guarantee for the new generation. Once the plant is in operation, the cost of megawatt hour produced barely changes. On the other hand, fossil generation technologies, of course, are highly dependent on fossil fuel prices and will also be strongly impacted by carbon taxes. A 50% increase in uranium, coal, or gas prices would make nuclear generating costs increase by 3%, while coals would rise by 20% and gas by 38%. Therefore, nuclear megawatts create predictable prices and avoid volatility and peaks on electricity prices. And may I say that a big increase in uranium price would be a very good thing for us, being the first producer in the world of uranium. So if our customers don't suffer, if it is good for us, it's excellent for everybody. Nuclear power is also reliable. The world's uranium resources will last more than 200 years on a business-as-usual scenario. And if you add to these mines the recycling tied to the closed fuel cycle, you further extend resources very significantly. And to end on a high note, nuclear power is not only the least cost low CO2 generation technology, it is, according to a wide range of studies, the cheapest base load generation technology available with hydro, even in low CO2 price scenarios. Confidence, long-term confidence, has also to do with safety. Let me be clear on that point. There cannot be any compromise on safety. Here and there, some are concerned by the safety standards of Generation 3 reactors, supposedly too high. Supposedly too high. I admit that there is a premium for safety in the new generation of reactors. But do you think that we can compromise with safety? Public acceptance at a price, and we have to pay this price. But this price, is it really too high? If you compare the cost of the new generation of reactors with the cost of the previous generation of reactors, it's a premium of 10 or 15%, not more. And it is guaranteed for 60 years, and whatever it happens, you know, even unlikely events, commercial airplane crash, explosion of hydrogen, core melting, everything remains in the box, and the box remains as it is, which is for public acceptance very simple to explain, even to the Greens and in public debates. And I think that if you look now at the safety standards, and of course we could discuss it a little bit together afterwards if you want, of course we have integrated in our design all the lessons learned from the different bad events having existed in nuclear. Of course Chernobyl, of course 3 Mile Island, and also September 11. So we think that those events we have to make sure that never it could happen again. We have also built confidence through our experience. 1/3 of the operating nuclear reactors in the world have been built by Areva, from which we still benefit experience by servicing the maintenance of many of them. And we are currently building 4 new generation reactors in 3 countries, 1 in Finland, 1 in France, and 2 in China. Each reactor we build carries each time more lessons learned, more experience gained, more skilled and experienced workforce available for future markets. We are currently experiencing it in China, where we apply the more than 1,000 lessons learned from our Finland EPR project. Thanks to this return of experience, the EPR, a Generation 3+ reactor, is already being built actually years quicker than the Generation 2 fleet deployed in the US and Europe, and similarly in China. The construction time of the EPR in China is going to be quicker than the Generation 2 in the same country. And this in spite of the fact that it has enhanced safety and security features since the previous generation. Our Generation 3+ reactors are indeed comparable to a steel and concrete box, as I said, from which nothing comes out in case of an improbable event, while nothing can penetrate inside the box. Just As a reminder, the previous generation of large Western reactors were built in average, between 100 months, 150 months per unit. Where our Generation 3 Plus reactor, that it is to say the early OL3 project in Finland and the Flamanville one in France, are planned respectively in 71 to 86 months. And we are at the end in Finland, so we know what it means. In China, it will be far below. It will be in 48 months. As a reminder, the average construction time for the existing US Generation 2 reactor fleet was 9.3 years, which is also a positive benchmark for Generation 3 new builds. So that's very important also financially, because the capacity to make sure that we are going to be on time first and as short as possible is a very important issue for our customers. It means that the UK will fully benefit from a fleet effect with improved features and reduced costs for CapEx as well for OpEx. We also build confidence through our long-lasting industrial partnership with British industry, both in the field of reactors as in the fuel cycle. Areva has long cooperated with the UK nuclear industry, for example, in the maintenance of Sizewell reactors or through exchanges between Lag and Sellafield plants. We know and appreciate the British remarkable skills, experience, and know-how in the nuclear field. In the upcoming new build phase of generation capacities, we want our British partners to share the benefits. Indeed, our double strategy in the UK, defined by partnering and localizing, aims at meeting the UK's energy needs for sure. But it also aims at involving UK suppliers in Areva's global supply chain so as to serve the world market. Success for companies supporting the new build program in the UK could mean success for them internationally, as requirement for new energy is international. We shall need all the help that we can get in moving forward. And of course, our intention is not to reinvent the wheel in each country. We cannot have, new suppliers in new countries systematically. So what we would like is to establish very strong relationship with a series of companies, and not only for working in UK, but for working globally with them. And so we have already established some very strong ties with some of them to create the condition of this global partnership. In the UK, the major part of our third generation 3 plus reactor, the EPR, will be supplied by British companies and by British workers. Because what is at stake in the United Kingdom is not just building reactors. We are talking about regenerating a whole industry. We are talking about thousands of jobs, not temporary ones, but highly qualified and long-term ones. The UK government speaks about more than 30,000 jobs in the coming 15 years. This is certainly why more than 120 companies, UK companies, have joined us at our UK Suppliers Day in Birmingham in 2009. And as I said, we have created a lot of relationship with them. We are now in a very practical dialogue with 60 of them, 50%, 60 of them. With Rolls-Royce, with Balfour Beatty, two of our key partners, and I would like to say again hello to some representatives here. We want to both address UK energy challenges and put again the British nuclear expertise at its right place on the world nuclear stage. So it's a real alliance between us. And when we speak about supplier, I don't like this word supplier. I would prefer to speak systematically about partners. We would like to create this partnership for UK and for the rest of the world. And I hope to be able to make a major announcement with a UK partner regarding the supply chain in the coming weeks, which will underpin our support to a sustainable manufacturing development in the UK. As you see, much is being done to build confidence and to turn low-carbon solutions into actual power delivered to the people. But of course, much remains to be done. I wish to focus there on 3 points. Still building, and I met a while ago a lot of you belonging to universities and so on, so it's, I think that it's very appropriate to speak about still building, about financing, and the building of public acceptance. New skills and training are vital in this rapidly evolving market. Skills needed are all across the board. Apprentices to graduates, engineering, construction, science, management, project managers, and so on and so on. We are pleased to have joined the board of the National Skills Academy for Nuclear and the Nuclear Industry Association, and we are in serious and active dialogue. We work on joint projects with other leading UK academic skills organizations. But we all know that training the new generation of engineers who will build the new power plants requires huge efforts for engineering not to be a bottleneck. I am fully aware that this issue has been tackled by this academy, but I want to draw your attention on that major point. Your role is absolutely critical in this matter. The second issue I wanted to raise concerns financing. The ongoing market reform will allow new projects to be competitive. Of course, it will depend upon the decision of major utilities. EDF, British Energy, Gaz de France Suez, Iberdrola, RWE, E.ON, their boards are going to make those decisions. And what I heard is that they are more and more convinced by the British policy in this manner. But of course, those decisions are going to be taken also regarding project financing. Of course, the City of London will have to play its part also in those decisions as well. Because the confidence we build also targets the financial community, which will, as far as nuclear energy is concerned, fully benefit from the fleet effect. And of course, financial community is going to play a role in the UK, but also in the rest of the world. Who is going to finance the new nuclear plants in the world? Only the sovereign funds, the banks, mix of both, the utilities? Which model for the future? The industries themselves, like in Finland? Big question mark, but I think that innovation in this domain is also highly expected. Lastly, let me focus on an issue which has to do neither with engineering nor with money, but on something which in my mind is also very important. I speak about public acceptance. When one speaks about large energy projects, it's true for nuclear, but it's true also for other plants now, you have automatically to speak about public acceptance. And I think that it's over the time where people could, a government could impose a project to people. You need to have a sound public debate. This debate has been launched by the British government through the electricity reform market consultation, and I think I welcome the forthcoming publication of the plutonium consultation, which is also a very important issue, to be launched by the government. The UK has world's largest plutonium stock, which could be major proliferation or security threat, but if recycled, will then provide low carbon energy for the next 50 years, a clean solution. Decision is of course for UK government, but we stand ready to support with our proven recycling experience. Let me tell you that as a CEO of the leading company in nuclear energy, #1 in Europe, #1 in the US, very present in China, in Japan, and soon in India, I am ready to take part, all my part, in the debate. Because I think when you are in my position, public acceptance is part of the game. You cannot build, like in the 60s, if you don't agree, it will be with the police forces. It's over. And I think it's not only over in Europe or in US, it's over also in the rest of the world. If we want to make sure that nuclear is going to be long-lasting, we have to prepare all together the discussion, the debate, to accept the fears, to accept the passions, to accept that you have also opponents. You don't choose your opponents. They are who they are. And we have to accept ourselves that nuclear means no taboo when we speak about nuclear energy. All issues, including the tricky ones, must be on the table. As for any large infrastructure projects, nuclear energy does raise debates and will certainly continue to do so. And whatever the technical answers are, and that's the main historical issue for nuclear energy, to have technicians speaking with the public is always very complicated. But when you take the question seriously and honestly, when you speak with sincerity, and when you take the time, I think a lot can be done and in this domain. But it means also that governments must show leadership and continuity. Because if you expect a consensus at 100%, never you are going to achieve this consensus. So one day or another, decision has to be taken, and decision has to be taken also in continuity. You cannot change every 5 or 10 years. I especially think in this debate, in this public debate about waste management and used fuel recycling, we are world leader in this domain. Often it remains the issue with the public. And I think that in this domain, we have also any complex to have, and to discuss it in an open way. We are very proud now to be associated with URS and AMEC for managing Sellafield and DRIG complexes. And there is no doubt, in my view, that the nuclear renaissance will go together with the development of used fuel recycling, where, clearly, the UK has a key role to play in the world. Let me conclude on a more personal touch. When I joined the nuclear industry 10 years ago, I discovered, 11 years ago, almost 12, I discovered a closed world. It was closed upon itself, defensive, and from the outside, opaque. In other words, I found a medieval fortress shut to the outside world, structure for defensive purpose, and with a lot of soldiers around trying to kill definitively the fortress. People could not say what was going inside. It was a kind of bunker, and were only told to be trustful. I started in Kojima, and I decided to transform this medieval fortress into an open mansion with many windows, so that everybody can see what's going on inside, and so that people inside can ignore perceptions on the outside. Those windows, like webcams and online radioactivity measurements, were set up on our industrial sites, for example at La Hague, because our reprocessing plant, a little bit like Sellafield, was special focused for anti-nuclear. We have also organized debates with all stakeholders, even opponents, and all the opponents. I took it for granted that one cannot choose its opponents. That's life. So maybe I don't like them, they don't like me. That's like that. We have to debate together. Well, 12 years later, I can say that this strategy proved successful. Of course, it takes time, it takes effort. Sometimes it's tough, sometimes not easy. Transparency means also to be very, very open, even in period of time where you would prefer to be a little bit more discreet, but it's, you have to be transparent, you have to be transparent. And now I think that nuclear is not anymore a word we dare not to pronounce. Because when I started, some people said to me, you know, nuclear, we could maybe change the word. I said, c'est quoi? To say what? That's nuclear is a little bit, you know, connotation is not so good. I was invited a week ago by the Assembly of Farmers in France, as the external witness. And the big question was about the GMOs. They said to me, we are unable ourselves to make to the people understand what means GMOs and biotechnologies and so on. And yourself, you are able to make nuclear acceptable. What is the recipe? Of course, we have no recipe, but you have to accept what you are, your own identity. Nuclear is nuclear, GMOs. They don't speak about GMOs now, they speak about biotechnologies. About biotechnology, not GMOs. You have to accept what you are. So that's nuclear. So we are not anymore in a situation, you know, to mumble nuclear. No, we are nuclear. But with the necessary also, without any arrogance, we have to remain as the right solution. I think that nuclear is not the solution, but it's a part of the solution for all the major, I may say, industrialized and emerging countries. Not for all the countries, because nuclear means a huge investment at the beginning, means also a rational, stable country. So for some countries, I'm sorry, I think that nuclear doesn't fit with the way they manage the country. So we have also ourselves to be very, very cautious and to be able to say no. And you know, I don't say no like that, but I am sufficiently polite to take a lot of time. And, so, if we want to win the race on energy security against climate change and shortage of energy, we have not a lot of choices. And in our energy mix, it's clear that nuclear is a part of this energy mix. And Europe, I think, has to say in that race, and more broadly speaking, in the race of competitive, low-carbon sources of energy. Emerging countries, especially China and India, are on a fast track, a very fast track. In Europe, the UK has launched an energy program which is by far the biggest in Europe in one country. But frankly speaking, we have a lack of Europe. 27 countries in Europe, 27 energy policies, 27 safety authorities. Can you imagine what it means for us to relicense always the same thing? Not always the same thing, because each safety authority has a trend to say, no, no, you are licensed in a country, but now this country is much more serious, so it will be tougher for you, and a little bit different to make sure that a touch. Bon. So for us, it's an exhausting exercise, but of course, I have to be very discreet on that, but it's absolutely terrible for the rebirth of this, of the whole industry in Europe, for the long-term growth for our countries. I'm just back from the World Economic Forum in Davos, where many of the world leaders were discussing the economic revival. Even in this temple of bankers, may I say that, the crucial role of industry and of energy is now acknowledged. The fact is industrial and energy work in new energy projects in the UK and elsewhere could play a major role in economic revival for the UK and for Europe. This is why, as a truly French and European company, Areva wants to be part of the game in a true partnership spirit. We want and we will have shovels in the ground as soon as possible to participate in the UK's energy project with enthusiasm. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention. I will be glad to answer any question you may wish to raise, and as I said, with enthusiasm. Thank you.
Now our speaker is open to questions. Please, one right at the back there, please. Alec.
I'm Alec Bros. I'm a fellow of the Academy, but I'm speaking more as a member of the Select Committee of Science and Technology of the House of Lords. And thank you for that brilliant and inspiring lecture, and congratulations on your leadership in this field. I've got two rather direct questions. What is it that the Chinese are doing that they can build these stations in 48 months? And what is your estimate of the ratio of nuclear power cost to gas-generated power cost?
What do they do? What do they make? Ourselves, our ideal scope in a nuclear plant is to deliver the nuclear island. So the nuclear part, you have the nuclear island, you have the balance of plant to prepare the land, and you have the conventional island. And we are also in charge of the control command. The fantastic added value of the Chinese experience we have now is, of course, we have all the lessons learned, so we have digested a lot of things, but the capacity of the civil works companies in China, they are incredible. If you look at the number of works in general made in China, it's not outstanding to, it's quite normal to have at the end a fantastic experience of the civil works companies in China. So they are able to build up now, in a very rapid way, all the things. So all the civil works made in China, at the beginning we were a little bit worrying about that, saying, do they have the level to do it in appropriate way and so on. The plants are exactly the same ones, the concrete is exactly the same one, and so on, but they are much more rapid. And not because you have thousands of Chinese on the ground, because of technology, thanks to technology. So that's very, very impressive. And of course, they are also less expensive, which is also important.
Do you want to take the piece about the costs? Gas against?
The cost, gas versus nuclear, it's very difficult to speak about the cost of nuclear because it's very different. For instance, the figures are known in the public. In Europe, an EPR, it depends upon the number of EPRs, it depends upon the site, depends upon the country, but it's between 5 and 5.5 billion euros. In China, it's at 3 billion euros. The same one, exactly the same one. So if you compare now the cost of the gas, where? In US now with the shale gas, of course, the competitiveness of a nuclear new build now is not established. 5 years from now on, situation will be different. And in other countries also, what is very fascinating for me is to see, it's another way to answer to your question, is to see Middle East countries willing to develop nuclear. And why? They have decided to invest into their own countries now. So a lot of dollars are invested coming from oil, are invested, or gas, are invested in Middle East directly, in industry. So that's the reason they now, a lot of, an important part of the oil production or gas production is used to produce electricity for their own needs. And a lot of them say, okay, now we are going to organize ourselves a little bit differently to make sure that we are going to be able to export more. We are going to develop other ways to produce electricity internally. So it shows that for them, in their own calculations, if they compare the fossil fuels way to produce electricity with nuclear, in the long term, they think that nuclear is the way to go, to export more oil and more gas and so on and so on. So I think that, you know, we are not ourselves in a way to say nuclear is better than gas or better than oil or better. No, we are complementary. We are going to need all the sources of energy. But to produce electricity, base load, in a big quantity, nuclear is a very good way to do it. But for stable and rational countries, and being sufficiently healthy to invest into that. So not the majority of countries in the world. No?
Thank you. Question just in front of the pillar there, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Richard Tebbeth. I'm independent. This society has just had a series of debates about UK industrial policy, etc. Some 50 years ago, we might reasonably have claimed to leadership in the nuclear industry. What is your reflections, or what do you think the lessons are we should learn of the relative performance of UK and French industry?
I have I could give you a sincere answer. When I started, I started very early in my career in nuclear in the CEA, but when I started again in nuclear 12 years ago, BNFL saw Kojima a little bit from the top, saying we are competitors, we were partners on something, and unfortunately for BNFL, you had a big scandal with the Japanese on falsification of MOX data and so on. And myself, I decided that never we would use this difficulty to criticize or to play treaty games against BNFL. Never. At the opposite. We have organized together things to contribute, to help, to ease, always. So we have this culture of partnerships. So maybe that's, in the short term, it's better to kill your competitors. I don't think so. We have a long-lasting memory. I think the other thing we have done is also to make Areva. You know, at the end of, in 2000, you had two theories in France. majority of people thinking that nuclear is over, that it's an old-fashioned industry, and that we have to split into pieces the nuclear activities and to make them disappear. That was one theory. The other one, that was mine, to say no, that's exactly the opposite. We have to create the conditions of integration between fuel cycle and reactors. And you know, two companies, Framatome and Cogema, sister enemies till... We have said no, we are going to merge and to make a real company with these two companies. And it has worked. And I think that the secret for us of our success somewhere, for instance in US, we are now number one in US, starting from scratch. That's because of this integration between nuclear maintenance, services, and the fuel cycle going with, including uranium mine. When I started in 1999, people said to me, you have to stop uranium mining. At that time, it was not a very profitable activity. It was a very small margin in countries which are not very attractive spontaneously and so on. They have very beautiful films, but you have to discover them sometimes. So I said no. And uranium is a key factor now in the game. So I think that integration, that was the motto of this success.
Thanks very much. Same line of sight, but further back. Yes, please.
Michael Kelly, University of Cambridge. I think you'll be very pleased that the students of engineering have come forward themselves and said that in future, and we're responding to it next year, that they want a new stream for professional development in the area of energy to go alongside aerospace, civil, mechanical, and so on. So I hope you'll be a sponsor of that. And the other thing also is that there is a new master's course on nuclear engineering starting again. So we're going to play our part in the Renaissance, and we look forward to your support. Thank you.
It was an ad.
Thank you very much.
But you are right. We have to attract the best students, the best engineers, the best in class. The good piece of news that it works. We restarted to recruit a lot of students ourselves, a lot of engineers, 2004, 2005. And now we are very well ranked in different parts of the world, including Germany, which is incredible for us. But even in Germany, the young engineers believe that nuclear has a bright future. And, you know, I think that we are very attractive because we are a cocktail of very important things for the young engineers. Of course, international activities, so to be... secondly, to be in very technological matters, so highly technological. Third, to be in energy without CO2 emissions. And fourth, we have a system ourselves of management, so-called Areva way. So it means that we don't manage Areva only with financials. We think that, of course, figures are very important, but we think that to be in a sustainable development and financial development, we need to be always better in terms of safety, security. We have this obsession in our culture, environmental data. So all the meetings, all the budget meetings, for instance, start by the records, the results in security, safety, environmental data, and so on. And I think that this obsession is absolutely for us. The day we have a big accident, it would have terrible consequences. So we have to be obsessed by that.
Madam, it's the students who are taking the lead.
Thank you. Gentleman back there on the right, please.
Hello, thank you very much for your lecture. My name is Tony Tiyu, and I'm actually a member of the Association for Black Engineers that I represent today. I have two questions for you. And the first question that's regarding what you say is the regeneration of the whole industry, nuclear industry here in the UK, in taking advantage of, let's say, the workforce here. And knowing that there is a shortage of engineers in the UK, I mean, that's what people have been saying in recent years. So how are you planning to tackle this challenge, especially because you need those people to grow here in the country? And the second question is, could you expand a little bit on your strategy to, let's say, tackle the carbon footprint of creating, working and making the nuclear plant working? Because the product itself doesn't produce carbon, CO2, but the running and the making of the product does produce CO2 emissions. So what's your strategy to balance it? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Shortage of engineers. May I say that we don't feel ourselves this shortage. Everywhere we are, we have not this problem. Sorry to say that, but and I think that we are also somewhere very very generous, because we train a lot of people within Areva also for our suppliers. So we have a kind of noria of people taking some, spending some time with us, and afterwards working for some of our partners or suppliers and so on. So we don't feel this shortage. I'm sorry to say that. So I have to apologize, because everywhere people explain to me that we are in a shortage. No, for us, no. So CO2 emission, no. A nuclear plant doesn't produce CO2. Alors, you could say, yes, yourself, you provide solutions for the utilities. As you said, the one-stop shop for the utilities for solution without CO2 emissions. But yourself, Areva, do you produce CO2 yourself or not to make it happen? We are obsessed by that also. So we are in neutrality, in carbon neutrality. No carbon emission. Alors, in reality, we buy some credits for that, but very limited one. If you look all of our activities worldwide, we produce 10% of one coal-fire plant, 10% of 1,000 megawatts. And this, taking into account all the things, the cars, the planes, everything. 10% of the emissions of a coal-fire plant of 1,000 megawatts. But we compensate this small amount. And we are trying to decrease this quantity. So, for instance, we are going to install in our reprocessing plant of La Hague a biomass chaudière, je sais pas. Boiler. Biomass boiler. So, everywhere, no CO2 emissions. That's our motto also.
Thanks very much. Question there, please. Thanks very much. Question there, please.
Andy Furlong from the Institution of Chemical Engineers. You mentioned three challenges, the third of which was public acceptability. And it's clear that there is a different attitude by different publics in different countries towards nuclear power. And you touched on Germany a moment ago. And it's clear that in France, there isn't quite the same public acceptance problem that we've had here in the UK historically in recent times, although I think that's changed. But if we are going to achieve public acceptability for new nuclear build, what's the magic bullet that you suggest that both the professions and the politicians can utilize in order to get the public on side? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Magic bullet. It doesn't exist, I think. Silver bullet, neither. No, I think that in my view, it's a matter of attitude. It's a matter of respect. Of public acceptance. Acceptance is somewhere a passive way. The word itself means, okay, I accept. It's more than I accept. It has to be I understand. Maybe I don't understand everything because it's too technological, too complicated, but I do believe that your thing works, and is going to work a long time. And I am confident. It's a matter of confidence, to create confidence. And so this confidence, I think, can be created only if the quality of the dialogue is sufficiently rich. So I think that the nuclear industry was very wrong, thinking that by definition the public cannot understand. So I do, you are going to accept. No. We have to understand the fears, we have to understand everything. And what is very interesting in the public polls, everywhere in the world, is the difference between men and women. In general, you have always, in all the countries, you have a difference between men and women vis-à-vis nuclear industry. Men are generally much more open than women. The highest difference in the world is in Japan, where the difference between men and women are something like 25% of difference. And why? Because it was traditionally a man industry explained by men to men. We have also, when I speak about that with my Japanese customers, because they say, how to develop global confidence and so on, I said, but maybe you need also to have some women with you to speak, not only a woman. For them, I believe that I am not a woman, but they are, a woman, but we have no women. Assistants, that's it. It's a little bit like this culture of partnerships. We are the first uranium producer in the world. You cannot produce uranium in a long term in a country without the deep involvement of the people of this country. That's exactly the same thing. You cannot speak to the half of the human people. You have to accept that, of course, the diversity and the way to organize the debates are, of course, different in the different countries, because you have a culture, you have a political life, you have which are different. But everywhere, I think that you need to spend time, and you need to be to accept all the questions, all the contests, you have not the choice. And if you are in this kind of feelings, when I arrived, for instance, we have had a lot of issues about our reprocessing plan in La Hague, with terrible possible criticisms. People say that we have created leukemias in children, things which were, if it has been true, if it was true, it was terrible. So to address these kind of issues, you have to respect the people think that it is true, not to say it's wrong. No, you have to study, you have to accept what it is said, you have to understand, you have to, and behind that you have always other things. Between this malaise on this attack on the cancers, you had always all other things. So you have to address all these issues. And we have worked, for instance, about nuclear waste. That's very interesting. What have people in mind when you speak about nuclear waste? Generally speaking, when you speak about waste in an audience, the ambience, the climate is not so good. But nuclear waste, wow. But what it means in your brain? Well, we have worked a lot about that, and we have understood what people have in mind in Europe, generally, when you speak about nuclear waste. They think that it is a kind of magma, boiling magma, very, very hot, and this magma, this lava, is going to eat all the possible vessels. And in French, we said, traditionally, we spoke about enfouissement des déchets. So the enfouissement, that's burying. No, it's not deep digging, because enfouissement, it's for the dead people. Enfouissement, it's a word used for the dead people. So we spoke about of the nuclear waste, and we have studied it, and people have said, when you say that, people have in mind, okay, magma, it's going to, like a volcano, it will come back, like the dead people, and it's a very ancient fear of the humanity, the coming back of the dead people, So we were, in the same sentence, we said, no, don't worry, be happy, everything is, people, it was impossible for people to believe what we said. And when we have started to speak about geological storage of vitrified residues, no problem anymore. No, I mean, so mental representations are also very important.
Thank you. There's a question here on the left. Yeah, please.
Bob Hawley, ex-CEO of British Energy, now Vice-Chancellor of the World Nuclear University. And that was so good, I could wave my crutch in delight. I just want to touch on fusion. I've waited about 35 years to see a commercial fusion reactor. How much longer do I have to wait?
Fusion, I am very happy for you, and I'm going to make maybe the same decision. It's always for the next 40 years. So it's so in the 60s it was for 2000. Now it is for 2045. So, ITER is I think a very good R&D program, internationally organized to test some assumptions. But we are going to know more 2030, 2035. If it works, industrial application 2045, 2050. If it doesn't work, back to square one. But maybe India, China, Europe, US are in ITER. Well, maybe something could happen, but if you look at the history of energy, not a lot of Thomas Edison, yes, Denis Papin in steam 1 century before, but not a lot of sudden discovery and everything is changing. I think that the thing changing really the things possibly is storage of electricity. Electricity storage could change totally the landscape. That's so we are ready ourselves to store electricity, rather big, 1 megawatt in a rather efficient way, but it's expensive, it's not for free. So to store in an economical way, a huge quantity of electricity, yes, it would be fantastic. I ought to see that.
Fusion comes along, I'll be one of the zombies you were talking about.
Maybe born again, of course. Right.
But what is very hypocritical in this fusion story, like in the Generation 4 nuclear reactors, is the fact that people willing to, and I do understand the enthusiasm of the research people and so on, they need enthusiasm, but they said, okay, fourth generation or fusion, it means no nuclear waste anymore. Totally wrong. Totally wrong. So.
Okay. There was a question here, please.
Dermot Roddy from Newcastle University. You made a strong case for nuclear power for base load, and then you talked about an energy mix. Now, we know that electricity demand is very variable. You've just said affordable storage is very difficult. So for a future ideal UK energy mix to be sustainable, low carbon and so on, What do you think should be in that mix apart from nuclear?
That's a question I'm totally unable to answer to this question because, often people ask me what is the ideal energy mix in the world, what has to be, what is the right balance and so on. Of course, you come from with an history. You have an installed base. You have also, each country has its own specificities in terms of industry, in terms of repartition of the users in the country, organization of space, and also this political debate. What do the people want? And I have not the answer. In terms of baseload, you could say you need by definition 50% of baseload, 50-60%. In the less, it's very hazardous. The day you don't have sun, wind, no water, or you are in the middle of nowhere. And people don't accept anymore shortages of electricity. It's incredible. 5 hours in some Algeria, the guy was fired in the network. So it's not accepted anymore anywhere. So electricity is a good which has to be available every day. You have countries where, for instance in India, you have not the grid to deliver the electricity. So, and it's a source of pollution, of a lot of pollution. An industry, an important user, if you are rich, you have automatically your own source of production of electricity, which means fuel, oil, which is not very good. But generally speaking, people want electricity. So for a government now is to make sure that the availability of the electricity with the minimum of CO2 emissions. So the recipe, nuclear, renewable. If you look at the last study of the MIT, very interesting, they say that's very strange somewhere because it's a little bit new in the US. They say nuclear plus gas. Renewables, a small card behind the curtains. I don't know the answer. But I am sure that it will be with nuclear and renewables somewhere.
Last question, please.
Terry Wilkins from the Nanomanufacturing Institute at the University of Leeds. I started my career in the nuclear industry, but left because it ossified. I'm fascinated by your approach to business strategy. It seems to me, under your stewardship in Areva, you've achieved more with your business-led strategy than decades and decades of political structures created within the predecessors of the European Union. Now, having said that, is there anything that those political structures that are around now can be done or changed to make life better for you?
Oh, yes. I have a list. No, in my dream, if for my birthday, for Christmas, next Christmas, the dream would be to have a European system for safety standards, at the minimum. My dream would be a worldwide, but Europe first. So to stop this system of 27 regimes and with this kind of exhausting exercise throughout the safety authorities. And, if you look Europe, it's a small continent somewhere. If a nuclear accident happens somewhere, it will have consequences everywhere. So we could consider to have common rules about nuclear safety for the future. And I think that it would be a very good debate. So I am trying to convince the European Commissioner in charge of Mr. Oettinger, Mr. Van Rompuy, Mr. Barroso, the different leaders. When you speak like that, they say, yes, that's very classic, but, the trend is, for each country, it's a kind of national, I may say, affirmation of authority, my safety authority, so I myself, I have to be also a little bit subtle because safety authorities, we depend upon them. And all of them each of them is very convinced that alone it's much better than, but at the same time, I think that it would be easier for them to establish common rules. So they have started a little bit like, central banks. Huh? They have started to discuss this matter together. So they have common meetings and they made some recommendations. So I would like not recommendation, I would like that's it, boom. And that's it for the next 2 decades. We want that, and it's going to be stable, and you have to obey. Okay. We need, squared things.
Thank you very much. I think I need to draw this part of the proceedings to a close, thanking you all for your questions, but most especially for thanking our speaker. We are grateful to you, Anne, for the breadth of your presentation, which covered everything your own business is about, but also what other businesses are about, touching on education, training, skills, legislation, politics, a tremendous tour de force, and I thank you for that. I was struck, perhaps most of all, by your advocacy of transparency, which I think has made a difference in this particular space, and obviously you live that advocacy, and we're grateful to you for sharing that with us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.